All right. I think we're still good. I think we're up. Tyler, you're in the place to be. What's going on, man? How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing really good, Chris. I'm excited to be here and hang out.
Yeah, I'm excited for this, man. I know I did a little background research on you just to, have a few talking points in my head. But you seem like you've had a pretty interesting story. Interesting life, I guess I could say so far, right?
You could say that, yes. Some may consider it interesting. I consider it my life, but it's always fun for me when it gets read back in like a bio. I was speaking up in Edmonton a few weeks ago. I was giving a keynote presentation, and the host that was introducing gave the little spiel. This is our next speaker, and they never say your name until the end just to build the excitement. Sure. And so he's talking, and I'm like, man, this guy sounds cool. I can't wait to meet him. And I'm standing backstage, and he's like, "It's Tyler Foley," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that dude's me. That's really cool. I've done some neat shit."
Nice, man. But yeah, you have done some neat shit, dude. Like a couple acting gigs. That's what else did I see about you, man? You got the keynote speaking. How'd you get involved in all this going on?
Oh, that. So yeah. So let's go back to the beginning. Shall we?
Let's do it.
The acting started out when I was young. 6 years old. I was the first time I was ever on stage, and it was life-changing, like literally life-changing for me. I was a born performer and didn't realize it until I got into my element. Some people don't find their calling until their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s sometime. I was blessed. 6 years old, I knew I was where I needed to be. And so I grew up in and around theater, and then got to move into film and television, do some real cool things, as you alluded to, right? Like the highlights that everybody likes, the remake of Carrie, Door to Door,
Freddy Vs Jason. I saw
Freddy Vs Jason. Yeah, everybody was. And then and that's the funny thing. Like, that's the one that people draw to. And like, it was literally 10 seconds of film. Like, you barely see my face. So, I got to do just some really, really cool things. And then in my mid 20s, 25, 26, I've at that point, I'd been acting for 20 years. And I did what most people do when they've been 20 years into a career. And I retired and got out of acting, went back to school, got an engineering discipline behind my belt, nice. Started my own aerial survey firm, which was like super cool because one of my other passions is planes. I've worked for a national airline in my past, especially as an actor. It was a super helpful job to have, because then if I needed to audition in Toronto or LA or New York, I could just literally hop on a plane and pretend like I was local. And I had friends all over the place because I like to make friends. So, it was always like, "Hey, can I crash with you?" And they'd be like, yeah, no problem. I'd be like, "Don't worry, I'm not going to get the part. So you're not committed to a long thing." And it was really fun. I got to, really do a lot. And then so when I started my own aerial photography firm and survey firm, that was just fun because I got to play with my own small planes. I had a fleet of 3. Unfortunately, that business collapsed really quickly. Sure. It's amazing what you don't know until you don't know it. And then, when you need to know it, how quickly it comes into play. And I didn't know a lot about business. I knew a lot about leadership, performance. I knew a lot about the technicalities of the industry that I was in, photogrammetry and map making, cartography. I was good that way, but actually running a business, I went to the School of Hard Knocks and learned a lot of lessons rapidly with my first business endeavor. And then, because I had my primary client was the government, because that's who, like, what I was doing was making those aerial photographs. Okay. So like anybody who's ever turned on satellite view on Google Maps, right? That's what I was doing. I was making those photo reliefs so that people could, you could see the building that you live at. And your primary client for that is not Google. It's actually the government, various forms of the government, sustainable resources, USGS. USGS was probably my biggest clients, United States Geological Survey. When you work for the government, they need you to have a safety system in place. It's one of the mandatory requirements. And so I had to go and get all this safety training to be able to put together the safety program, to be able to manage the safety program at my company. And when the company failed, a buddy of mine who's a far more successful and far more brilliant businessman than I am, said, listen, he runs an electrical company, putting not the utility, but actually electricians going out and wiring stuff,
Sure.
new build, new construction. He said, I'm involved in this nearly $1 billion construction project. And one of the requirements they have of this is that I have a full-time dedicated safety manager on site. Would you be interested in doing it? Because you actually have all the training necessary. I just need to get you these extra 3 courses, and then we can get you this National Construction Safety Officer designation. Off you go. So I was like, sure, let's do that. And while I was on site, there's a lot of money, a lot of players, a lot of interested parties that are going through this construction process. And so there was like quarterly inspections where all of the bigwigs, all of the stakeholders would be on site. And I remember this one time, there were these guys that were they were doing things that they shouldn't have been doing, right? And working off of a ladder the way that they shouldn't have been working off a ladder. They're trades guys. What they do. And they'd peek at me. They're like, you're not even an electrician. You don't even know what's going on. You don't know how to do this stuff. Go back to your trailer. That's where safety belongs, is in the trailer. You want it to be safe, you don't be around here. And I was like, yeah, except for what you're doing is remarkably dangerous. And although I've never pulled wire the way that you've pulled wire, I used to jump out of 6-story windows for a living, and that was safer than what you're doing right now. And that was a bit of a stretch, because I was an actor who occasionally did stunts. And one of the stunts that I did was a high fall out of a 6-story window. But that, you're right, super cool. Used my own personal story and flipped it on them. And they were like, what? And so I was like, come down, because if you think what you're doing is safe, I'm telling you it's not. And from my perspective, jumping out of a window was better. And the building that we were constructing was this very large complex. And at the time, it wasn't fully developed. And so it was very echoey. And the stakeholders, all owners of billion-dollar corporations, were walking through a lot of suits and ties, a lot of letters after names. And one of them pulled me aside. He said, is that true? I said, is what true? He said, did you used to jump out of windows? I was like, well, yeah, kind of. And then I gave the explanation that I gave you. Yeah. And then he goes, and that was safer than what we're doing here. This oil and gas facility where safety is paramount and critical. And I was like, oh yeah, absolutely. Which was, by the way, both the right and the wrong answer, because they do not like to hear that what they're doing is not safe. And it's not that it's not, it's just that what I did was safer. And so I explained it. So he asked if I would give that as a toolbox talk the next day. I said, sure. Gave it as a toolbox talk the next day. One of the other executives was in the toolbox talk and pulled me aside. He said, Tyler, is that true? I said, is what true? I said, did you jump out of windows? I was like, yeah, that's what I saw. That's why I said the story. He's like, I find that fascinating. Would you be willing to give that as a keynote presentation at our next safety stand down?
Nice.
I said, absolutely. What's a keynote? I didn't know at the time.
Sure.
And so he was like, yeah, no, this is what it is. And he explained it to me, and I was like, sure. So his assistant reached out to me and said, what was my speaker fee? And I was like, I don't know, but I have a couple of people who have like done things similar to that. And I knew a few speakers, and I had a couple of friends who ran agencies. So I did a couple of phone calls, and I was getting like wildly different numbers from these people. I heard everything from $2,500 to $50,000 as keynote fees. And I'm like, well, I need to ballpark here, right? So I was like, I don't know. I'll figure out what my monthly salary is.
Okay.
Right. So I'm just going to write down my monthly salary, because I know if somebody says what is a thing and you don't know, there's 2 answers to that. You just throw a dart at the dartboard, or you say, I don't know, what's your budget? And then try to figure something out there. In this case, I wasn't that savvy. I didn't say, what's your budget? I just wrote down my monthly salary, gave it to them. And they said, okay, would you like that in advance or on the day? Well, give it to me in advance. And as soon as I realized that I could earn my month's wage in advance in like 45 minutes versus 28 days up on site, I was like, well, let's do this thing. And so at that point on, I was doing keynotes. And then I did it. Initially, my keynote was on safety. and it was called Jumping Out of Windows, the safest job I ever had.
Nice.
And that has morphed over time because so many people would come up to me and be like, how do you do what you do? Like, because they've seen a lot of keynote presentations. They've seen a lot of people who speak on stage, but apparently I'm very entertaining and make safety interesting, which is a very difficult thing to do. And so they would come to me and they'd be like, how do you do this? How do you do this? How do you do this? And I said the same thing over and over and over and over again, to the point where I was like, you know what? I bet you I could make this a training thing. So initially I had what was called basic instructional technique, is what I had initially called it, because I liked it because it was an acronym and it could be BIT. It was my BIT course, right? And basic instructional technique. And I would have people come in for 2 days, and it was literally public speaking 101 for mid-level managers and supervisors who were thrust into the position where they were going to have to give presentations of some form, whether that's a toolbox talk or a meeting or a presentation, and who didn't want to do it. Sure. And so I started training them to do it. And then that morphed into me full-time training people, and not just in the construction industry, generally, how to be better presenters on stage. And now I have, the Power to Speak Naked, which is my #1 best-selling book. That has a support of 3-day course. We have the Power of Influence, which is a 5-day workshop. Like, everything just kind of spun out from there. And it's just been fascinating. It's just been an absolute joy to end up here from where I was at 6 years old.
No doubt. Damn, Tyler, that was quite a handful right there, man. I mean, but yeah, that's wild to me. I mean, and plus one of the great things, like, you have a cool story, just it kind of almost fell in your lap, and just all your life experiences and stuff just kind of built up to this one defining moment, if you will. And it was either, hey man, shine or sink or swim, I guess. Right. And you just swam, baby. You're in the Olympics, man.
Yeah. Well, and again, it was unbelievable how, like, I look back and it's such a straight path. I'm like, yeah, that happened. And the trajectory is 100%. If I was 6-year-old me looking up to 43-year-old me is going, that is windy and curvy as hell. Like, how did you manage that? But everything, right? Tony Robbins says it way better than I do. Life happens for you, not to you. And like, all of these things kind of led me to here.
Nice, man. Just and like, you kept grinding with it along the way. I mean, were there any hiccups, like when you said, "Nah, I ain't doing this anymore. I'm getting out of this."
Oh yeah. I mean, when the business collapsed, I was devastated. I'd just come back from a business trip, from Hong Kong. I'd gone out, and basically, if that trip didn't go the way that it needed to go, we were folding. And it didn't go the way that it needed to go. And I remember getting off the plane, and it was just a hassle getting back to, because the flight had gone mechanical, and so it was oversold, and my fare got bumped, and so I was on standby trying to get out, and I was the last person to board, and the only seat available was a first class seat. So hey, I got a free upgrade to first class. And I remember sitting in the first class cabin and crying on the flight back, because this was a thing that I couldn't even afford if I wanted to, and my business was collapsing. It was just overwhelming. I couldn't even enjoy my first class seat back, because I knew that the reality was that business was about to fold. And I just, wanting to give up, like, really, I wanted to give up at that point. That was kind of my life focus. That was my last 3.5 years. It was 2 years of school. It was networking. It was a family legacy. Not my father nor my grandfather, my uncle, the one related to my father, was a photogrammetrist. My other uncle was a cartographer. My grandfather was a surveyor. So a lot of that was in my blood. I felt like there was a legacy there that I needed to sustain, like, all of these things. And it was weighty on me. And here I was, actor boy. And, it was crushing. It really was. It was one of those things where, because I didn't like acting anymore either too. Like, I retired at 25 for a reason. It had become a job as opposed to a vacation or even something to do. Like, it was a grind, and it was hard, and I was tired of doing it. the irony is I went and I got a real job, or more rather, I transitioned from acting at all and just kept my job with the airline. And I didn't make the same earning that I did acting for over a decade. Like from 25 to 35, everybody was like, you have to get a real job. And I'm like, why do I got to get a job? Do you know how much I made acting? Like that was decent. Like I could live, and I only worked as a working actor. Only job that I had for about a 7-year period. I would work 80 to 150 days a year.
Sure.
And earn more than I working full time plus doing shift trades at the airline.
That's wild, man. I don't doubt it.
Yeah. So,
but you kind of alluded to this. I mean, you said that, was it burnout where you just got tired of the acting stuff, and like, it was kind of cool that you just went after, I forgot what you called it, but what your uncle did, and that was kind of part of your blood. And was that like a calling for you too at the same time?
Well, so yeah and no. What ended up happening was I, while working for the airline and I was stationed in Toronto, and my family lives in Calgary. So it's the equivalent of basically New York to like Denver, Colorado, right? As geographic distance in Canada. And I was trying to travel back home to see my mom. And my wife, my father-in-law, who wasn't my father-in-law at the time, lived in Toronto. And my wife had come, and he used to work for the airline. And so he had what's called a golden pass. So he's as an employee that retired and had like 25, 30 years service with the company. Even though he didn't work for the company anymore, he retired with the company, and he was able to have his flight passes continue on. And my wife was under, I think as a dependent, she could fly until she was like 25 years old under his passes. And so she had gone out to visit him and was trying to get back to Calgary where she was living and going to school. I was trying to get back to visit my mom. Same story. There, a whole bunch of flights got canceled. There was a standby list. My wife ended up getting bumped off of like 12 or 14 flights over the course of 2 days.
Oh, shit.
I showed up on the second day, and we ended up chit-chatting because we were noticing that we were getting bumped gate to gate to gate, and we were just kind of traveling together, and you start to see the familiar faces who, when they're like, passengers standing on standby on Air Canada flight 155 to Calgary. The flight is full. Your itinerary is automatically transferred over to the next flight. And there's like 12 of you who are going, oh, right. Like you can see the disappointment on everybody's face, and you start to see the same people. So I had noticed her, and she was with this group of 2 other girls, and I thought they were flight attendants. So I just went up and chit chatted them thinking they were in flight, and they were like, who the hell are you? And what are you saying? We don't understand your words, but you're really cute. And so we ended up sitting on the same plane together and just chit chatting. And so my wife and I ended up being friends for like years before we started dating, 2 or 3 years before we started dating, just chit-chatting. And when she graduated just before me and her started dating, and I had decided to go back to school just before we started dating because I'd read a thing Darren Hardy talks about if you got to map out who your ideal dream woman is, and then you figure out what that person would want in a man.
Sounds interesting.
Or right. So like, or your dream partner, and then what they would want in a partner.
Sure.
And then you do a gap analysis. What of those things do you have, and what of those things do you need? And I had done this gap analysis, and I was like, well, if I want to date my wife, I want to marry my wife, because I wanted to marry her. I wanted to marry her the minute I saw her in that airport. Nice. I knew that she was an important person in my life, but I got very rapidly put into the friend zone. And I was like, I don't like this. Ooh. I don't want to do this. I will play here for a little bit, but I am boyfriend material, and I'm going to prove it to this woman. So one of the things was I needed to go back to school. I needed to get an education. And so, I basically looked at her. I was like, well, she went to SAIT. I can go to SAIT. That was the school that she went to. So I looked at what the offerings were, and I'm like, what do I know and what interests me? And there were 3 different courses that interest me. So I one of them was the geomatics engineering technician, which is the photogrammetry and
Gotcha.
the cartography. It's the map making, surveying and map making is what it is. And the other one was like non-destructive testing, which is using X-ray and ultrasound to test materials, particularly in pipelines and metallurgical stuff. And I can't even remember what the other one was at this point. I literally threw a dart at it. Oh, it was an EMT. Oh, I wanted to be a paramedic. So I was like, I could go ride in a meat wagon, or I could go test these things, or I could go out and survey. And I was like, I would be happy doing either one of those. And I just threw a dart, and it landed on the geomatics engineering technologist program. And so that's how I chose to go back to school. And I was like, well, of course, that's where quote unquote fate would send me, because look at the lineage. Even when my first job that I had when I went out to Vancouver to start acting full time, thinking that I needed to have a job, was working for my uncle's photogrammetry company, scanning aerial photography into the computer, which was funny because within a year of working for him, he was like, you don't want to work here. You go act. He said, I'm holding you back. Go act. So I stopped working for him I started it just before I turned 18, and I stopped just before I turned 19. And basically from 19 to 24, 25, my full-time job was acting. And then I picked up the Air Canada gig about the last 6 to 8 months of me acting, because it gave me this freedom to be able to travel and do it. In my head, I had done everything that I could in Vancouver. And I was like, well, if I'm going to continue in this career, very ego driven, by the way, because it wasn't true. It was a story I was telling in my head. If I was going to continue in this career, I need to be able to broaden my reach. I need to be able to audition in all these places, and they won't see you if you're not local. So I had to be there. And it was just a way for, somebody who was doing okay to sustain my lifestyle on my own, but didn't have the means to travel regularly to New York, LA, and Toronto if I wanted to. So it was a quick way to make ends meet.
Touching on what you just said there about being ego driven, I have I don't want to say a lot of debates, but I have some conversations on here about, can you be successful with or without an ego? And, you got to be on the fence about it. I mean, there's a difference between obviously arrogance and confidence, but you need some type of ego, right? And some type of confidence to keep pushing you forward and keep driving you, but you just can't lay in the cut and just take what life gives you. You got to kind of want, go after your dreams and go after what you want, kind of like what you were saying, but kind of have a path to stay forward and go forward and go be positive and say, hey, this is what I want out of my life. I just want to lay here and just take, long story short, just take whatever the easy road, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think you need to have a self-confidence, and I think what more than anything, you need to have faith that what you're doing is the right thing.
True.
Whether you have an ego to go with that, it can both help and hinder your path. Like, I was really cocky at 25. I'm booking more now in my 40s than I did in my 20s for a couple of reasons. I give 0 Fs right now whether I book a role, because I don't need to book a role, because I have 3 companies that I run. Most of my revenue is generated from speaking on stage and helping other people speak on stage. If I happen to get this acting gig, the money is irrelevant. The money I don't care about. It's just an opportunity for me to go and play. I got to do a few months ago, I got to do a show with Shannon Elizabeth. It was just a day player bit. I was just a couple of lines, one day on set, but it was really fun because, she's American Pie fame. And I actually got to work on set with her twice before in Vancouver on Scary Movie and 13 Ghosts.
Oh, yeah. I remember this.
But what I was doing, I didn't actually get to interact with her. So on Scary Movie, I was doing photo doubling, a little bit of stunt doubling, and some background work. On 13 Ghosts, I was doing stand-in work. And so I was on set and around, but I didn't get to interact with her. So, fast forward almost 20 years later to be able to get to do a scene with her and actually like interact was just, it was fun. It was playtime for me. And the check came and I was like, oh yeah, no, that's nice. And in fact, all my acting checks don't even go into my regular bank account. They go into, because I'm Canadian and I get paid in US funds when I act. So I have this little US fun money account. So if I go to like, Mexico, or if I go to Vegas or whatever, however much I've got in this little fund, it's my play money. So, if I'm going to Vegas and if I'm going to go to the casino, because I don't like to gamble, like it's not a thing.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
But I love playing poker. Like I love the game. I absolutely love it. So
Texas Hold'em.
Yeah.
And
so it's just, it's just fun for me, but I'm not going to get into like the big games and I'm not going to gamble a lot of money. So a lot of the times I just I have this little fund of money. It's not much, I still get residual checks from stuff I did 25 years ago, and it just goes into this little fund. And then if I want US money, now I pull out the US money and then I go, and then I'm not getting stung with exchange fees and all the rest of that. And I create my budget. Sometimes I have a big pool of money to draw from and I go, oh, well, I'm going to limit myself to $200. Sometimes I have, $150 in there. And I'm like, well, I guess my budget is $150. It's whatever. I just keep it very low, very minimal. But that was, I book more now because there isn't that push for it. And I think a lot of that comes down to the ego. Because when I was 25, first of all, there was a hunger. And I think you need the hunger to want to push and to keep doing things.
I agree.
But there's also a point where that hunger becomes desperation, where you're starving. It's okay to have a hunger and a drive. It's another thing to be starving and emaciated. And that creates desperation, and that creates a lot of panic unnecessarily. And so I think right now I'm comfortable, so I can just go out, I can just show up and do. And, I'm in a great place in my life. My wife and I have built an incredible life together, and, we have a really stable family, really stable home life, great support. So there aren't some of those pressures that I had earlier on in my career. And now I just go out and do.
For those who don't know, Shannon Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler, was in the first American Pie, and like the foreign girl that was trying to get with Joe. Okay.
Yeah.
So I feel like everybody would be looking her up right now, just who's she talking about? But yeah, that's who she is.
Yeah. But, and phenomenal human being, by the way. Plays poker herself, has been on the World Poker Series a few times. I don't think she's ever won, but she's definitely played it with some high level folks. Including she was at a table with Daniel Negreanu, and I think he busted her on a really bad read one day. Well, bad read for her, great read for him. Daniel Negreanu, as a Canadian, I follow him. I absolutely love him. But then she has this incredible animal charity too that she supports. So like she's beyond Shannon Elizabeth, the actress. Shannon Elizabeth, the human being, is an incredible person.
Yeah. I want to ask about poker a little bit, just because, ever since I was a little kid, like was in my family's tradition. Every time we had family get togethers, everything, we were playing some type of poker, whether it be Texas Hold'em, Follow the Queen, 5-card draw, all those stupid little games that you can do with it. We were betting with like 5 cents, 10 cents. And it was fun for me growing up. And, I don't play as much as I used to now, but it was still, I got into online poker for a little while. And I was like, I can't keep doing this. This is going to turn into almost an addiction. I did have one uncle who went under for a gambling addiction. That's when I was kind of my stop sign saying, maybe just end of the line for me. But what, is this something you just always done too? And you just got into it, or what?
Growing up in the theater, when you're backstage, card games are the thing. So it starts, right? Like you're playing cribbage or Kings in the Corner, or what are some of the other ones that we used to play? Like Asshole, like if it's always, game of that going along. And then eventually it's just like, well, hey, because you get the poker set and the poker chips, and it's not real money, so you get to play. And I'd watch the other people play, and as an actor, it becomes real easy to you start to be able to read people, and you can start to tells, and it's really good for you to be first of all aware of your tells. Like I think one of the reasons that you see a lot of actors who move into poker and are a little bit more successful with it. Jennifer Tilly is another example of a great poker player. And I think one of the things that makes her an incredible poker player is her performance background, because not only is she aware of her own body, but because we spend so much time mimicking other people, we can start to see what we're mimicking. And so you start to pay attention to patterns within people's play and just pay attention to it. And then you can start to pick up on people's tells, and it makes, for a really good player. But I mean, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. I don't know what's more fun, playing a good hand like you've got a weak hand,
sure,
or playing 2-7 off suit like you've got pocket aces. Like that, to me, like, honestly, there's sometimes where I will just be like, I will make up the story in my head. And even if the cards are coming up and somebody's got a hand, you're playing a hand that you're probably drawing dead to, that the fake hand, your real hand is definitely dead. You have no hope, but you're drawing to 5% chance, and to be able to have your pretend hand hit and have the balls to be like, I'm in, and convincingly be like, no, that was it, I needed the card. And to have somebody be like, you're holding the ace, aren't you? Yeah, you had the ace of clubs, didn't you? Yeah. Did you have the clubs? You have the clubs.
Got it. Because I got it, baby.
They had the flush on the river, but you had the ace, and so now you have 4 clubs out there, and you're repping the ace of clubs, and you totally hit. Oh yeah, no, to be able to, and then to turn it over to, if you want to be I've never been, but I've always seen those guys, they flip it over and they're like, yeah, here's my 2-7 off. They were both red cards. Yeah, lies, just lies. Yeah, I love the game. I love the game because it's a game. I don't love the game because of the money. And that's why I play it to play it. Like, I am playing a game. And, it's, I love that line. It's a game played with, it's a game of people that happens to be played with cards. That's how to me, it's a study of human emotions, highs, lows,
for sure,
nervousness, and both nervousness from a bad perspective and nervousness from a good perspective. And what's the difference? What's the difference when you're nervous from a place of weakness and when you're nervous from a place of strength? When you're hoping a thing goes your way in a good way, you're like, how much can I extract out of this hand? And when you're nervous for things going bad in the wrong way, how much am I about to lose? Right? Like, it's a difference. It's a different nervousness. And to be able to see that, play it, interpret it, for all of those reasons, I absolutely love the game. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, dude, it's so fun and exciting. Just like you just made it sound so great. That's exactly what it is. Because you're excited. You're like, "Oh, am I going to get it? Has he got it? What are we doing here?" You're trying to read everything. But I would imagine you can transfer a lot of those skills with your keynote speaking. I'm sure. Can you reading the audience? When
yeah. Well, and that's the thing. So again, acting gave me all these skills. So learning to read an audience started very early in my age, 6, 7, 8 years old. I was learning to read energies, read the room. I was also learning what human behaviors are like, what emotions are like, as I got into my later teens and really started studying the craft. I went to the Alberta High School of Fine Arts. I really started to study, like Meisner and the Actor Studio and method acting and just different techniques of how to get into it. So I've always been a study of human reaction, both to be able to portray it and to know what an audience is thinking and if we need to pivot. And so that has translated unbelievably well for me as a keynote speaker, because you can read a room, when things are going down or when things are going up. I was given that keynote presentation up in Edmonton a few weeks ago. And, there were a couple of times where the room, I needed to change the energy of the room. Like, you could just sense it. I was talking about my father passing away when I was 6 years old, which is one of the things that led to me being on stage. And when I presented it, I always talk about the 2 most significant moments of my life came when I was 6, and they were both sounds. The one being the sound that the audience made the first time I was ever on stage, and they clapped and stood up and gave me a standing ovation. And that has put me on a trajectory to be doing this as my career. And then the next sound happened 2 months to the day after the first. And that's the sound that my mom made when a police officer and my family physician came to the door and told her that my father would never be coming home. And the sound that she made was just devastating. Like, it was guttural. It was animalistic. It reverberated through the house. It shook my spine. Like, it's a sound I never want to hear again. And that has impacted the trajectory of my life and every decision I've made, both of them happening at 6 years old. And so I was going into this story and very much how we are right now. Like, I know how your audience is feeling because I can see it in your eyes.
Yeah, dude.
I tell that, and it gets heavy. It gets heavy quick. Right. And so, and I know, but I can feel that. And I'm like, okay, so how do I turn this around? Like, how do we bring this to a point of happiness? And to be able to take somebody on a journey is something that I learned very quickly. And so as a keynote presenter, I rely on that very a lot, because that is what you need to do. You need to take your audience on an emotional journey if you want to have impact with the words that you're saying. Sure. And you need to, and one of the quickest ways to do that is to tell your personal story. So one of the reasons I use that story is because I know where I was exactly when, and if I want, I've given a very quick 30-second synopsis when I was doing it for the keynote. It's about a 5-minute talk where I put them in the environment where I was, what I was doing, reading a comic book, and just minding my own business. And all of a sudden I hear this shuffle beside me. So like I can place the audience in there, but it's important that I know that I've brought them up to a high so that they're happy, that they've heard the applause, and I even get them to do it. Like, if I'm doing the keynote presentation, I'm like, I want everybody to just do this for a second. Yeah. Right. And everybody starts clapping. I'm like, okay, a little bit louder. Now I want you all to stand up and really get into it. Right. And I'm like, thank you very much for my standing ovation. I'm done now. Right? And then exactly that. So they're laughing. And I'm like, that sounds
smart. That's clever.
That kept me going. Right. And then I get into that bit, and then they're heavy. And I'm like, now listen, I want you to know, you can go from high to low and it doesn't take very long. Somebody could be at the peak of their career and they could have it completely, totally ripped out from them. But I want you to remember that it's based on the choices that we make. And then I start to take them and I give them a point. Les Brown says it way better than I do. You never tell a story without a point.
Sure.
And you never make a point without a story. And those are words that I took from Les directly, talking to him one-on-one, getting to work with him. And I've taken them to heart ever since, right? Stories are what connect us. They're what combine us. It's how we've communicated as a species for eons.
I agree 100%.
And so that's one of those things where I know why I'm saying the things that I'm saying and what trajectory we need to go on. And so, yes, being an actor and being in tune to where my audience is at and knowing where they are in that emotional spectrum, and then knowing how to take them there. Because you can't leave your audience on, this dude's dad just died and I'm sad about that. Sure. And just drop that. You can't leave that. You've got to bring them to what came from that, right? Like, I don't believe that I need to look for the positive in things in life. I don't. In fact, I would argue that my father's passing was not a positive.
Okay.
Right? I'm not making that a positive, but there is grace in everything that occurs in our life. There is a divinity in everything that occurs in our life. I'm not going to make my father's passing a positive, but it was something that was necessary to put me on the path that I was today. My father hadn't passed away, I would not be who I am, what I do, and I wouldn't have the things that I have. I wouldn't have met my wife. I wouldn't have had my grandchild, or his grandchild, rather. I wouldn't have my daughter. So all of these things were necessary. All of these, that winding road, when 6-year-old Tyler looks forward, that winding road that occurred is a straight path looking backwards, because there was divine grace in everything that happened. And it was all necessary. And so I look for the grace. I don't look for the positive.
That's powerful stuff, man. Just because, it's so easy to be negative in this world, and there's always, people, why me? Why did that happen to me? But they don't, they don't understand, hey, there might be a reason down the road that, this is happening. I mean, do I know the answers why? No, I don't know why. And I'm not very religious, and I don't, and if you are, that's fine. But I mean, there's a plan for you, I guess, in some universal law, if that's what you believe or whatever. But just because, something negative, bad happens to you, and it means there's ways like that. You said it perfectly. You can turn it into like a grace, I guess, is basically what you said.
Yeah. And then because I think the thing with, the positive, look for the silver lining. Well, screw the silver lining. Like, I don't like, yeah, your dad died. Yeah. And here's the positive that came from that. No, I don't want to do that. But I do know that, it was an important and defining part of my career and my life, and who I am is defined by that moment, or at least in part defined by that. A lot of things have gone into creating the human that I am, but that was a big one.
Yeah.
Right. And two very influential moments within 2 months. And so I think it's important that we look at what those are. And it's funny because I was actually thinking about this over the weekend. I was in Dallas. I was supposed to be speaking in Dallas with Tony Robbins.
Nice.
And not with him, not face to face, but on his stage at the event Power Within that was in Dallas just this past Friday.
Okay.
And the power went out on the back riser. And so for 40 minutes while they were trying to get power to it, the host, who is another phenomenal speaker, Bob Cattell, was basically tap dancing without any AV. So he had no mic, he had no lights, he had no presentation slides. In an auditorium, or like a stadium, a hockey stadium designed to seat 12,000 people. And here he is solo voicing it. And I'm looking at Bob, I'm like, man, what a pro. But because they couldn't get on, I was the low billing speaker on it. And I was only ever going to have 5 minutes. That was it. That was and everybody else had anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes. Tony had 3 hours. But I was literally a 5-minute spot. And it was a favor from the promoter. He flew me down, did all the stuff. And he's like, if you've got 5 minutes, if you want to sell this event that you're doing in October in Las Vegas, I'll give you the spot. We'll split the revenue, whatever. And I was like, great, let's do it. And what did he have to do? He had to pull me aside and he's like, listen, man, we're behind and I need you to give up your spot. I can't have you on, even though it's only 5 minutes. I can't have it on.
Damn.
And, so instantly I'm like, oh, and I, where the mind wants to go right away. I'm like, I'm stuck in Dallas. Just before I flew down on a Wednesday, the event was on a Friday. And on the Tuesday, my wife had been sick starting about the Friday before.
Okay.
And so she was, just out of, not because of anything that's going on in the world, just because out of politeness, she was isolating up in the room upstairs. I was staying downstairs. I was taking care of my daughter. And my mom was supposed to come up and help out with my daughter because she's 6 years old while Jen was away, my wife. And, while she's working, mom's going to take care of my daughter and get her to school and everything. But because Jen was sick, I was like, well, it'd be better if we just take my daughter down to my mom. And out of an abundance of caution, because I had to test for COVID to leave Canada and come into the United States, right. I'm like, well, we'll get Kenzie, that's my daughter, tested, just in case, right? Just peace of mind so that mom knows that, everything's okay. My test comes back completely, totally negative. I'm good to go. I'm cleared to go to the States.
Nice.
And then the pharmacist comes out and he's like, yeah, and she tested positive. I'm like, she did what now? And then I'm phoning my wife and my wife's like, yeah, I just tested positive. I'm like, well, you did what now? And I'm like, okay, now I can't be around you guys. So I'm down in Dallas and I had, if I wanted to focus on the negative, I could be, over the weekend, me landing back in Canada on a Sunday, late Sunday, these are two stories that I could tell. My spot got pulled. The stuff that I needed to get done in Dallas, I couldn't. The event didn't go the way that it needed to. The hotel that we were booked at gave away my room. Even though it was reserved, we had a reservation. The hotel gave away my room.
Damn.
When I went to get on the flight, there was a big storm that went through the East Coast, and I had to, instead of having a direct flight into Calgary, I had to go Dallas to Toronto, Toronto into Calgary, and Toronto's airport just got decimated in this storm. So they were backlogged for ages. And so my flight went mechanical, got canceled. Then I was set on standby. So it was supposed to be an 8-hour trip home, ended up being an 18-hour trip home. And so reverse of what happened in Hong Kong, what was my first class ticket became this standby last seat cattle class down in the back seat. So I didn't get my meal. I didn't eat all day. I couldn't even come home because my wife and my kid are isolated. So that's one story that I could tell, right?
Yeah.
Or that all that was factual, all that was truthful. Or here's the other story that I could tell. Promoter believed in me enough that he paid for me to come down to Dallas. And even though I didn't get to talk, I got an upgraded hotel room at a separate hotel, fancier hotel than what I would have normally stayed at the venue. I got to be chauffeured around in a private limo service to and from the venue and to and from the hotel. I got to, for the first time in all of these events that I've been doing with Tony Robbins, get a private photo with Tony Robbins. I got to be backstage with Molly Bloom, Bob Cattell, Phil Town and his wife, Bo Eason and his wife. Dawn Eason is an idol of mine because I remember watching her on 902 or on Melrose Place and thinking, what a phenomenal actress. And to actually get to meet her in person in the green room is phenomenal. I got to make a huge impression on the promoter because I was gracious and grateful to just be there. I didn't have to pout about not having any stage time. It was only 5 minutes anyways, and we didn't know what we were going to sell. He's going to work with me to make sure that going forward, we have a bigger, better event. Bo Eason wants to work with me so that we have a bigger, better event.
Wow, dude.
I got to... instead of having to kill time at home and find out alternate arrangements because my family is having to isolate, that time was taken care for me. So I got to hang out longer in an airport. I got to meet a couple of my old friends that I used to work with in Toronto. Because I had all of that time, I was able to go into the baggage hall and meet people that I used to work with and have a really good lunch and a catch up and a visit. Both of those are true, right?
Sure.
So you can focus on the positives or you can focus on the negatives. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not focused on either. I'm just enjoying my time. These are just things that are happening. This is just part of the weekend. It's not a good weekend. It's not a bad weekend. It's my weekend. And that was how it went.
Man, that's a pretty awesome story right there, dude. I mean, just turning that completely into positive and all worked out. But while you were talking, though, I had a question come in my head that, when you first started speaking in front of these audiences, I know you did the acting and everything, but, was there any, nervousness, stage fright? Cause I've gave a couple presentations, for work and my things, but it's nothing like major keynote stuff but there was part of me, it was obviously, the more I did it, the better I got. But the first couple of times I just remember stumbling over words and, even like the first one I remember even giving in college, dude, it was a shit show, man. But I mean, it was just, I was nervous. I was almost like sweating and everything, but would that ever come to you or is it just a natural flow?
So I'm blessed in that I know exactly what you're talking about. I have experienced stage fright. It's just few and far between for me. And again, getting to be on stage at 6 years old, anybody who has a young child, 4, 5, 6 years old, that they're fearless.
Sure.
Fearless because they haven't learned what is scary yet.
I don't care.
They haven't experienced it. So hot oven, let's put our hand on it. Seems fun, right?
Sure.
Stick me in front of 10,000 people. Why not?
No big deal.
They don't know, especially if it's dress up and playtime. Like my first experience was in a beautiful 1,500 seat auditorium. And to this day, I still can go to that theater because I grew up, I'm still in Calgary and it's where I grew up. It's where home is. So, what is my home theater? I go and I watch plays there all the time. And it's one of those, it's a comfort place for me.
Yeah.
So I'm actually remarkably comfortable on stage in front of an audience. And the other thing is too, depending on where the venue is, half the time you can't see the audience. Like if it's a theater or an auditorium, you're there on your own and you can hear and you can feel the audience is there, but you can't see them. It's this dark blank haze. Like they're not even there. So for me, it's been a comfort, but I do remember the first time that I experienced stage fright. At that point, I had been speaking for about 8 years. I was 14 years old and in the 9th grade. And for Remembrance Day, our version of Memorial Day,
okay,
there is a very famous poem called Flanders Fields. And it's by John McCrae. And basically, there are two things that happen at any Remembrance Day ceremony. You're going to have a horn player play taps, and somebody is going to read in Flanders Fields. That's just how it is. And so from about the time I was 8 years old, I had this poem memorized. It was just one of those things where, I've always been really good at memorization, and nice. And it's a gift. And again, one of those things. How do you know you're doing the thing you're supposed to do? You have all the tools in the toolbox to be able to go and perform this job. And for one of them, I've always been able to memorize. So from about 8 years old, I had In Flanders Fields memorized and committed to heart. Right, in Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amongst the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, lived and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. And it goes on and on and on. But I've had that poem committed to heart for forever. So in the ninth grade, the school that I went to was divided. You had elementary, so 1 to 6, and then you had junior high, 7 to 9, and then there was high school, right?
Sure.
10 to 12. And so when you were in middle school, when you're in the ninth grade, you're the oldest student there, and you're kind of a big deal. You're kind of important. And I was kind of important. I was Tyler Foley. I was actor, I was
big energy,
a theater, right? And I knew this poem. I knew it by heart. I could just say it. And so I was asked to do it. And at this particular assembly, usually I would do it, and it was just students and faculty.
Okay.
But at this one, they had a whole bunch of veterans that were there. I think it must have been the 50th anniversary of the end of World War II. It would have been the Second World War's kind of 50th anniversary. And in Flanders Fields is from the First World War, but you still read it. And so they had all of these veterans, and this one veteran, they wheeled him in a wheelchair, and he had a cane across his lap, and he was decorated. Like, he had every medal you could think of. Like, his chest was like this. He had the hat. He was, suit was pressed. You could tell it only came out for special occasions, kind of deal. And he had these blue steely eyes. Anybody who watches Game of Thrones will get this reference. He looked like a White Walker.
I'm with you.
Like, he was pale, and his eyes were like, they almost glowed blue. And he's staring at me, right? And I'll never forget it. He leaned forward. He had this cane, and he picked it up off of his wheelchair, and he leans forward like this, and he looks at me, and his eyes pierced my soul. And I'm looking at this man, and I'm thinking, this dude's seen some stuff.
Oh, shit.
Like, he was there. Like, and then all of a sudden, the words that were just words before, like, I can put emotion behind it, but they were just words on a page to a 14-year-old kid. And all of a sudden, I'm like, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow. These were his friends. They were alive. He's seen people die. He's been in a place of death. He knows. Sure. What do I know? I don't know anything. I grew up in a small farming community. The biggest excitement that I saw was, a cow died giving birth, right? Like, that's like, what do I know?
Right.
I know nothing.
I agree.
And all of a sudden, all of this stuff starts running through my head. I'm like, who am I to be giving these words? And then they call my name to come up and do it. And this guy's looking at me, and in my head, he's thinking, come on, kid, what do you got? Right? Don't disappoint me. The reality is he was probably thinking, why did they wheel me here? It's lunchtime, and, Jeopardy's on in a half hour, so this better not go too long, right? That's probably what he was thinking. But in my heart, he's judging me. Oh, is he judging me? And so the poem's called In Flanders Fields. The very first line is, in Flanders Fields, the poppies blow. I stand up and I go, poppies.
Oh, God. Oh shit.
And you know, my face flushes, my armpits are like sweating, and my mouth is completely dry, and yet I'm spitting a whole bunch. I'm sweating like this, but I'm freezing cold. My hands are shaking. I can hear my pulse in my ears. It's just like I can feel my chest wanting to burst. I want to throw up. Like all of these things happen all at once, and I'm like, oh, this is stage fright.
Oh gosh.
Ooh, I don't like this. And my vice principal, rest his soul, Mr. Holloway Chuck, he kind of graciously pushes me to the side. He's like, we have a copy of it over there. Just grab it and go read it. I'm like, okay. You know, and then they just went over and played taps, laid the wreath, and then brought me back to read the thing. By that point, the mean grizzled guy, who, by the way, kind of looked like Clint Eastwood if you shoved a lemon in his mouth and then kicked him in the balls. That's what he looked like. I love it. By that point, he's drifted off to sleep. Yeah. So he's not even looking at me anymore. I'm like, okay, we can do this. We can get through this. But I didn't realize in that moment, but what I realized later on in reflection, especially as I started to write my book and tried to get stuff out, is what I was actually afraid of was not public speaking, right? At that point, I've been public speaking for 8 years, performing for that. What I was, and what most people who think they're afraid of public speaking are actually afraid of, is public judgment. And so the reason I hadn't experienced stage fright up until that point was I always trusted and had faith that the audience was on my side, that they were there for me. They were there to be entertained. And my job was just to go and make sure that I did my job, go out, perform, make them happy, and hear the applause. The applause was how I knew I did good. And so it was never a frightful or terrifying thing. But then in that moment, with that veteran looking at me and realizing, A, I hadn't done my prep work the way that I needed to.
Sure.
That I hadn't given it the gravitas or the consideration, that I hadn't put my audience first. That put me into this moment of judgment. And I was terrified. I was terrified of the judgment that I would receive from that audience. And that's really what stage fright is. So yes, I have experienced it, but it's few and far between, and significantly less the more I do it, right? Confidence comes through competence. And
I love that saying. Yeah.
The only way to become competent at a thing is to do it over and over and over again. You know, repeated effort alone will bring you perfection.
Yeah, that's one thing I've been learning doing these podcasts and stuff. You know, the more I do it, and me trying to research some stuff and, you know, get some talking points. But yeah, I firmly believe in competence builds confidence, dude. And first time I heard that, it just resonated with me. It's like, that makes so much sense, you know? It's like, you know, and you can tell, you know, there's levels to everything as well as, you know, and like as far as podcasting, acting, athletics, you know, it's just, you have these humbling experiences and stuff, and you're like, oh yeah, there's levels. Okay.
I'm a goaltender in ice hockey, and I play very regularly in the plus 65 league. I'm on my 43rd birthday. I'm desperate for goalies, so I get to play with the old guys. And I feel like I'm Dominic Hasek out there, right? Or Andre Vasilevsky, or any of these great goalies right now, Binnington, you know, and I'm like, I shut the door on these guys. And then I go play with dudes, you know, every once in a while I get to do a league game with ex-junior players, and they're still in their early 20s, and they light me up.
Oh shit.
Right. It's that confidence thing. It's always that, you know, with the old guys, I can track that shot. I'm like, I got this. And I play with the young guys, and it's like, pa-ting. And I'm like, well, I didn't even see it. What? I'm getting shellacked. It won't translate. You can almost see it.
Oh yeah, dude.
This is a bruise from 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I took a puck off, and I wear a chest protector, a heavy pro level chest protector.
Wow.
And I have a chest protector and I have a throat collar. It's Kevlar. I like to tell people that I took a rubber bullet standing up for freedom, just because it's better than saying that I took a puck. Because, you know, a puck is a rubber bullet, and freedom is keeping the puck out of the net. I stood up for what I believe in, a zero score on the.
I love
it. And it hurt, man. And those guys. And after that, I'm like, no, man, you can have that shot. You want that? It's yours. Just yours. Go for it. Shoot. You do that thing, man. Because it hurt. But yeah, confidence, man. When I'm playing at this level, I forget that I need to play at this level.
Yeah.
Right. And I play low. It feels good. I mean, hey, yeah, it feels good. I like playing with my old guys. They're fun. They're great. But when I need to challenge myself and I'm up here, but the funny thing is as I start to play that game and I start to get into my rhythm, I start to make some saves. Yeah, I'm not posting a 9.2 save percentage. I'm probably down around the 7,500s or like even sub 7. It's bad, right? I'm letting in 3 goals for every 10 shots, but I start to get better as the game goes on. And maybe I let in 3 or 4 at the beginning, but I start to learn the shooters. I start to adapt. My brain starts to recognize that puck's traveling a lot faster, and I gain confidence through competence. And the next thing I know, I'm stepping out on top of the crease and I'm challenging those shots a little bit more. I'm playing a little bit faster because they're playing a little bit faster. And all of a sudden I'm back on top of my game, and the old guys hate it. They hate it because they can tell the days where I was playing the night before with the 20-year-olds, because I come on, I blank them. I'm like, where are you? I've got this.
Tyler, I know we're getting a little short on time here, but tonight, I feel like we've talked about obviously competence and confidence. We talked about ego, your acting, your story. I mean, a little bit of everything. I mean, was all this just kind of rolled in, and the reason that was a motivation for you to write the book?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, the book, it's funny. The book came about because I was tired of saying the same thing over and over again, right? Like people would come to me and they're, well, how do you do it? How do I do what? How do you get up on stage so confident? How do you get over stage fright? How do you prepare properly? Like, cause that's the other thing too. I'd hear all the time. I'd be like, people are like, I prep and prep and prep for months for a speech, and then I blank. And I'm like, okay, what are you doing? And they're like, well, I spend all this time memorizing. I'm like, okay, well, there's a problem. Stop. Your prep is wrong. And so I would take people through and I would just say it over and over and over again. And finally I was like, oh, I should just write this down. I wish I had a thing where I could just like hand it to you and be like, here, read this and go, and then come back with questions, because then there'll be better and more informed questions. And then we can really start delving deep into the techniques. And so that really was the driving factor behind the book. That, and I was starting to get bigger and better stages as a keynote presenter. And one of the first things some of the larger promoters are going to ask is, well, do you have a book? Do you have a course? What do you offer? Because they want a back end to it, right? You never just go on.
That makes sense.
Right? You never just go on as a speaker. Like no keynote is just a keynote. They're a keynote who are doing a breakout session. They're a keynote who offers a course. They're a keynote who has a book. You have some coaching. You have something else to offer beyond just, hey, this is me and this is my story and this is what I do. And so, I was getting the bigger, better stages. So as just part of the evolution of my business model, I needed to have a book. I needed to have a course. I needed to have coaching, and all of these things came together. So there was a lot of motivating and driving factors behind the book, but the content came from, I was just tired of saying the same thing over and over again. It was easier to say it on stage to 1,000 people than to individually do it one-on-one. And if you wanted it one-on-one, let's have an introduction and start with the book.
Tyler, let's take this home. If people want to find you, find the book and all that good stuff, if you want to plug all that, how do they do that?
Well, there's a very quick and fast way to do it. But before I give it to them, Chris, I would ask them to do me a favor.
Okay.
And that is, if they're getting value out of your show, and if they're coming on and regularly downloading episodes of your podcast, they're coming back for a reason. And I would ask them if they've given you any kind of review. And if they haven't, I want them to hit pause on whatever device they're listening to right now, because you're on it. You're listening right now. So it's real easy to do. You hit pause, you go 5 stars, or, a thumb up or a like, or whatever your platform takes, give a 5-star review and let Chris know what was an episode that had impact on you. Like, what was a guest that he had on that mattered to you? What is the content that he's bringing you that resonates and has impact on you, so that Chris can then get better guests on to serve your needs. So be very specific with your review. Like, what do you like? What do you want to see more of? And give it a 5-star. And if your audience is willing to give you a 5-star review, because they hit pause and now they're back hearing this part of this message, because you've spent the last 5 minutes giving a 5-star review. If you've done that, then I would invite you to come to SeanTylerFoley.com. And Sean is spelled the proper Irish way, SeanTylerFoley.com. And on there, you find all things Tyler. Right above the fold, the first thing you're going to see is an invitation to come into my free Facebook group called Endless Stages. And there I go live every Tuesday at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern time. I give a 20-minute training on whatever comes up in the group that day. Today, we did lessons learned from watching other speakers, because I just had the opportunity to be at a conference with 10 other world-class speakers, including Tony Robbins, and see what some of these big names do to prepare, the mistakes that they make, the wins that they have, how they prep. Phil Town, who's one of my favorite speakers, I love watching his presentation for how it's structured and the way that he sells without selling, like all of these things we discussed. So I come on live every Tuesday, noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, inside of the Endless Stages Facebook group. You can get to that very quickly by going to SeanTylerFoley.com. And then you can get all of the freebies too. If you come through the website instead of through Mark Zuckerberg's site, if you come through my website to do that, you get freebies, including a free download of the PDF version of my book, The Power to Speak Naked. You get access to our Drop the Mic Trainer program. You get a free 20-minute one-on-one session with me. All of these things I make available, and I would love to offer that to your audience as a gift, but only if they give you a 5-star review.
Tell them.
You have to give Chris a 5-star review. You're already on the platform. I've reminded you 3 times. Hit pause, give it a 5-star review, come back, go to SeanTylerFoley.com, get your freebies, get signed up in Endless Stages, and I'd be happy to help them explore their story and how to get it out there.
Cool. Tyler, thanks, man. This was great. You're a badass dude. So
it's my pleasure and my joy, Chris.
All right. Appreciate it, man. Everybody, we're out of here. Be good to yourselves.